Hello and welcome to another episode of the SumerSports podcast. I'm your host Parker Fleming, and I have beside me, as often this summer, my co-host, colleague, and friend Tej Seth. Tej, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Yeah, this is really the dog days of summer from a football perspective. We were just talking about Big 12 Media Day results before we started recording here. So, it's getting thin. But, when we have really cool content like what Shawn put out today with his Kyle Shanahan article, I think it makes it a lot more exciting to talk about these things during the off season.
I have read many things this summer and even this offseason, pre and post draft, that have made me want to stare out the window and say, for the love of God, we need football to come back. Shawn's piece is not one of those that made me do that. Shawn's piece is one that made me read it and say, oh man, I can't wait for football to come back. This is great. It was informative. If you haven't noticed, if you're on the audio listening to this later on, you can't see him, but joining us today is Shawn Syed, our director of communication at SumerSports. Who has written an article just exactly hit the spot on what we needed right now about the Kyle Shanahan offense. There's film, there's clips, there's deep dives, there's graph breakdowns, all there on sumersports.com/the-zone. Before we talk to Shawn, I will remind you that you should sign up on sumersports.com/the-zone. We got some emails there, and I'll say we just have had some meetings today, even finishing up something that's going to be pretty awesome. So you'll want to be a part of that. I will note, we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but we do have a new sponsor this month on and going forward, I believe beyond this month on the Sumer Sports show, Circa Sports book, and just a book that has sharp lines and is one that I always check to see where they are with the market, because it really does a lot of good work out there in helping people, one, think about sports, and two, put a little skin in the game. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Without more ado here on the Sumer Sports show, let's talk to Shawn. Shawn, how are you today?
I'm doing great, guys. It's funny you say it's the dog days. To me, right, once you pass that 4th of July mark, we're now really moving towards the season. I get it, Big 12 Media Day, but we're coming up real soon on best shape of their life kind of season. You get all those fun videos from training camp, guys without shoulder pads running routes. We're getting mighty close to a lot more fun.
Yeah, I've talked myself into Tom Kennedy making the Lions 53-man roster 3 years in a row based on reports saying he's the best shape of his life. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
You got to do what you got to do to get us there. But I think it's a season of optimism, and eternity kind of begins anew every season. So, Shawn, let's dive into this. Let's dive into this article. We'll kind of bounce back and forth. Hopefully, this is conversational. And I want to talk to you, pick your brain a little bit about the Kyle Shanahan offense. My first question here that I just want to start with is, Shawn, how do you know so much about this offense? How do you have these diagrams that look like they're from a playbook? Where did kind of you start getting, becoming a student of the Shanahan offense?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate those kind words, and, always a student of it. I think that I've been really lucky that there's just been a lot of really, really smart people who have shared their resources, and I feel like I've been able to leverage that. If you Google Kyle Shanahan 2018 49ers playbook, I have it linked in the article, but you can look it up, right? And now, is that every single thing that goes into every single offensive game plan? Absolutely not. But I think taking that, grinding the film, matching it together, talking to other people, there's a lot of really smart people that have put a lot of time into this, put cut-ups together, guys like, James Light, Bobby Peters, people that have worked hard on this. So I'm not going to pretend like it's all me or that I've been someone who's magically discovered this. There's been a lot of people in the space. And it's funny, this offense, really since that huge boom in 2018 coming from McVay, it gains more popularity year after year. But to me, the Shanahan offense, it is special. It is different than the McVay offense. And, I'm wearing my 49ers red today for a reason.
Yeah, so when you talk about McVay offense versus Shanahan offense, and, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that the main difference of these offenses stems from really their personnel usage. In the current state that these offenses sit in right now, Sean McVay primarily runs one running back, one tight end, 11 personnel across the board on more than 80% of the Rams' plays last season. But Kyle Shanahan uses 12 personnel. He puts two tight ends out there. And then after the Christian McCaffrey trade, we saw a huge uptick in 21 and 22 personnel where he has two running backs out there, as well as sometimes two tight ends. Is that where you kind of see these offenses differ, or is it something deeper than that?
I do think it's deeper, but I think that's a really smart place to start, right? 11 personnel, especially in 2018, the Rams were getting into it. They were able to no huddle and really have these long play calls cut down to one word out of one formation, particularly because they had guys, like Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp doing the dirty work and making those blocks. Sometimes I wonder, if you switch McVay and Shanahan, if they had different personnel, would they get to the same kind of answers? But of course, Shanahan has really, really special personnel. And so like all offensive coaches, I think they put their players in positions to succeed. They get a lot out of those players. Like Kyle Juszczyk and George Kittle are something that, Sean McVay just does not have, right? I do think that Shanahan's personality, it's a little more, almost in your face about the run game, which that's something that I appreciate so much. And I understand I'm on an analytics podcast and work at an analytics place, but, we're going to reestablish the run in 2023 for sure. But thinking about that personnel usage, and because of that personnel usage, now the defense has to prepare in a lot more different ways. And Tej, I know we talked about something specifically about, I think it was a paper about just using different personnel usages and how often that really connects to winning, right? And so when you get to kind of, 4 different personnel packages, not that it's just a magic number, but if you have those different personnel packages, the reason why it's a positive is the defense has to prepare for more things out of different looks. So if you're in 11 personnel, there are certain runs that you just can't get to, right? So then you see the way that, the Bill Belichick, he has that kind of 6-1 front, the Fangio 40 front, and you can combat that. And you may not have the same answers that, Shanahan went against that same defense against the Chargers sometimes last year, and he gets a different kind of a run game, more an inside zone run game from that. And to me, the beauty of just using those different personnel packages is that there's real balance for the 49ers. And by that, I think the way to think about balance is you can throw out of run looks, and sometimes you can run out of more pass looks, right? So if you're getting a defense that they are lining up in their base personnel, they are more hungry to get after the run. If you can pass against those looks, you're going to have more success on offense.
That speaks to something, Shawn, that I'm kind of interested in. Did you see recently kind of talking about maybe it was George Kittle was on a podcast and talked about, hey, we're gonna run a run that we know doesn't work, so we can set up a play action later, set up a pass. We know Shanahan uses a ton of play action and obviously is a pioneer in kind of how it's used. How much truth is it to this kind of detailed level of sequencing, perhaps even inducing a bit of an intentional one step back so they can take 2 steps forward later in the game?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Kevin Clark and the Slow News Day podcast that with Stephen Ruiz was on that day that they had Kittle talking about it. I think there really is truth to it. The word or the phrase that Kittle used was unlocking the defense. And I do believe in it. I also believe that every offensive coordinator has that same goal, right? Every offensive coordinator wants to set up the defense in different ways. And I think where Shanahan may have more success in that, I think he knows and understands, for example, okay, we can run outside zone 3 times. After we run it 3 times, that defensive tackle is going to lag a little bit. We're going to be able to get up the field. So having that really intimate feel of exactly being tuned into what is happening on the defensive end, understanding, okay, if we, get more attacking towards this middle linebacker, he is going to want to fill that A gap. We're going to be able to get play action behind him. So I personally don't think he just burns plays. I think that I would imagine if you asked him, he would also say, hey, look, this is being set up in a different way. And then you just see, okay, well, why is this guy wide open, right? I think one example was they'll always run these kind of 2 tight end sets to a close side of the field. So the cornerback has to be involved in run support in some way or has to just do more in the run game, filtering out, okay, is the tight end releasing? Is the tight end blocking? What am I doing? Am I filling the outside edge here? Am I a force player in this way? And then you see some guy running right behind, right? And that doesn't really happen on accident, right? There, of course, there's assignment mistakes in the NFL, but those happen because Shanahan does know how to unlock the defense. So I wouldn't say that there's wasted plays or anything like that. I do think, and I want to ask both you guys, where does it come into play, especially with like EPA, right? So if you are having, a lower EPA on just like an inside run that's setting up something later, do you think it averages out over time? Or is it something where, hey, we can't really track this play set up another play and kind of need that context?
I think the EPA point is really interesting because when you look at the distributions of how EPA on rushes and EPA on passes is laid out, EPA on rushes, taking out turnovers, has a pretty narrow distribution because oftentimes the worst that you can do in a rush is a 2-3 yard loss. And then the best that you can do on a rush usually is around like an 8-9 yard gain. It's really tough to break off an explosive rush. But then with passes, it's a lot easier to break off explosive passes, especially when you're getting into the play action concepts that you just talked about. And so that has a wider right tail where the EPA distribution of passes can really get stretched out wide because of how often explosive passes occur compared to explosive rushes. So I think when you talk about that, and George Kittle ended up going on part of my take and kind of clearing up that comment and saying that it's not like they're completely burning the run, but it's a run they think could work, but is really the main purpose of it is for setting up plays later. And that makes a lot of sense because you want to dig into that 80th percentile pass because those are the 20-plus yard passes that really can keep your offense at an explosive rate. And Eric Eager, who's usually on the show, and I have a paper coming out in a journal pretty soon about how linebackers are influenced by different things. And one of the things was when you're going up against a mobile quarterback, linebackers have a lot tougher time moving, and they often get stuck where they are on the play. But then Kyle Shanahan's offense also popped up top 5 in keeping linebackers stuck because there's so much window dressing and there's so much sequencing that these linebackers have to account for where they don't know exactly where the ball is going to go.
I think it's also been kind of interesting to see kind of more modern thing where linebackers, where maybe you'll see on TV, like, okay, well, why didn't that linebacker move? And I don't think like that is not a mistake, right? These linebackers are being taught now, hey, you need to bite less because, as you said, right, these runs are going to have likely a lower EPA than something like these big play action passes. And a lot of those times, but the 49ers can run those, boot those movement keeper plays because those linebackers are feeding in to stop the run. That's their natural response. That's also, at least half their responsibility, right? So sometimes it's hard to, I think, access that right tail of the pass game without being able to, not establish the run, but really establish the threat of the run, I think is the more important way to think about it.
It is my sense that the identifying a causal effect of setting up a pass with a run is largely conditional on whether that pass was successful. And given how skewed that distribution is and how infrequently those passes do become explosive, if you were trying to tie that to specific plays and say we're doing that, I think a lot more of that is just Kittle having a very good articulation of the fact that there is a sequence to gameplay and that there is a path dependency to football, and that Shanahan is someone who has some level of metacognition during the game. He's thinking about how he's thinking about the plays, right? And saying, hey, we did run this when we were running this, felt like there was stuff in the A gap, talk to the guys on the sideline. All right, next time, let's run this. Let's run the play action. So not to demean it or anything or say it was false, just say it was a good articulation of something that I think is pretty straightforward. And I think that any empirical attempts to quantify that would largely find no effect. And most of the times that you say, hey, we set that up is when that play works. When that second play doesn't work, then you're really not talking about wasting a play to set it up in the long run. But that kind of deception it feels like a key principle to the Shanahan offense. Shawn, is that fair? I mean, deception in the sense of play action is literally a lie. And then, of course, deception of you want to be able to place people in different areas out of multiple personnel groups. I think it's interesting in your article, you talk so much about the different personnel groups that they run, but they do kind of have two Swiss Army knives in Kittle and Juice at the fullback. Juice played 25% in the slot, 18% of snaps out wide, 11% he was pass blocking. And then Kittle, of course, 30% in the slot, 10.5 out wide, and then a lot, in line. 57% of his snaps in line with Juice having 16.9% of his snaps in line. So it's not just that they have different personnel groups, but it's also that they can put either of those guys almost anywhere on the field and then have them switch between that role of fullback, blocker, lineman, wide receiver pretty fluidly, which contributes as well to kind of putting stress on the defenses. So maybe, Shawn, my question is talk about Kyle Shanahan lying and how well it works out for his offense.
Parker, I want, play action is literally a lie on, t-shirts in all different colors and different sizes. I think that'll
be the next Sumer merch for sure. Play action is literally a lie.
We'll be able to talk. But yeah, I think you make a really good point in that, taking different parts of the puzzle and putting them in little different places to still make the same puzzle is really interesting. And I think that they were able to leverage that a lot more when they had Christian McCaffrey. There are examples where I think it was versus the Cardinals where literal same exact formation where, Christian McCaffrey's in the slot, the next formation, it's switch, Deebo's in the slot. They can run the same plays But now does the defense just treat that as, hey, there's just X's on the chalkboard. If they're in I form right, like they're in I form right. But the way that Shanahan adds on to that is just the shifts and motions. It always amazes me that there's just not constant, like there's not a delay game every single play. Like if you look at, some of the PDFs, just the amount of words that have to go, how quickly the play gets in is so crazy. And I think it stresses the defense because you have to prepare for so many different things. You have to prepare for so many different shifts, however, literally getting lined up is difficult, I think, because you're seeing what are you going to line to, right? Is it the run strength? So we're lining to the tight end. Okay, the tight end just switched side. Okay, great. Now we need to shift in some way. Okay, so we changed our responsibility one time. Now we just saw another motion coming in. We just changed our responsibility a second time. And now at the snap, something that they've done more, and you see it, of course, with the Dolphins, is these surge motions, these really fast motions going behind the quarterback at the snap to really just whole entirely morph a formation from look pre-snap to post-snap, going from 3-by-1 one way to 3-by-1 the other way. How is a defender going to change their responsibility 3 times in real time at full speed with a guy as big as George Kittle running down at you? That is just an absolute headache from an alignment standpoint before you even get to, hey, I need to take on this block with my outside shoulder. I need to be able to either box it or spill it or do something like that. So McVay, I think, got a lot of hype for, like, the illusion of complexity is the word that, was a real big buzzword, I think, in 2018. A lot of things do look the same. I think that Shanahan understands how to do that while also just adding in these, that makes me feel like the old Boise State days where just how many times people are, taking their hand out of the dirt, switching to the other side. And that costs us so much for a defense. I think sometimes we might think, oh, like just run motion, right? Like that is a positive thing. But of course, I think we all agree that's reductive. It's purposeful motion, right? If you're motioning something to, hey, we want to push those linebackers over a gap, or we know when we motion a guy across the field, we're going to get a safety kind of rocking in one direction. So that's something I think that Shanahan has just an extreme knowledge of, understanding, well, my shift and my motion is going to do X thing to a defense, and therefore I can kind of run Y play off of that.
That's why I think the 49ers personnel is so special. Like everything you mentioned there, where when the 49ers run motion, they could be putting a player that usually plays some sort of position into another position because that player can play that position. Like Deebo Samuel is a wide receiver that can play running back. Christian McCaffrey is a running back that can play receiver. Kyle Juszczyk can play fullback or in the slot if he has to. And George Kittle can play tight end or in line and become a 6th offensive lineman. So you have all of these interchangeable parts where when they're using motion, that it's very hard to distill exactly what's going to come out of a certain play. And that's what I think makes the personnel so special. And on top of that, it's a very yards after catch based personnel, which I think is what the NFL is moving towards right now. When you look at the data, yards after catch EPA per drop back has been at its highest in the past 6 years, and average depth of target and EPA have the lowest correlation together since 2017, which we know is in part to the cover 4, cover 2 shell becoming more popular, but also due to other factors like these offenses scheming up players into open space and hoping that they can get yards after catch ability. So how do you usually see Shanahan go about that relative to how like the rest of the league usually gets into their high yards after catch concepts?
Yeah, so I think that, Shannon is special he can just really, put his microscope on and find, all right, this is the defender we're going to attack this week. This is the unfortunate player on the other team this week that is just going to constantly get put in a bind. As these defenses, continue to have more too high shells, I think for a smart reason, right? Limit the big play in the pass game, force teams to kind of dink and dunk over and over. Even when quarterbacks like obviously Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes are, more than happy to do that. Shanahan understands, all right, we need to find different ways to conflict those underneath defenders. Because a lot of times, especially in quarters, right, you have, sometimes the weak side linebacker just covering that quarters flat. And, I'm going to take my money on Christian McCaffrey having, really a 3-way go in those option routes, right? So I think that the option routes are really cool. I think that's something that the 49ers and, the Rams have done it with Cooper Kupp, but having, your running back starting in the gun, right, on the side of the quarterback, kind of like taking a few shuffle steps to the side and then running the choice route as opposed to just kind of starting in the slot. And what that opened up with Shanahan, it seemed like they were able to kind of run option routes to both sides. So having choice routes to both sides, I feel like even saying it out loud, sometimes it doesn't kind of make intuitive sense. Well, why should that work? But, the way the quarterback is able to squeeze that ball in the window, the way they're able to open windows through kind of wider formations, even when they have guys kind of condensed in, has been really, really cool. So understanding, all right, well, this is what the defense is going to present. But even then, what I really love about Shanahan is, the 49ers are this last year were the team that they saw cover 3 the most, right? So they are able to make things easier on the offense just by formation, because the defense is at some point usually going to have to find a way to, if we're going to bring 2 tight ends in, you're probably going to stuff the box in some sort of way, right? Even if you're in that, that 6-1 front that we love from Belichick Fangio, right? Like a lot of those times, those safeties are going to kind of want to get involved in some sort of way. So we've already kind of put an easy button on the quarterback, right? Assuming that there is like literally no quarterback, if I can guarantee at least, 55% of the snaps are going to be against cover 3, like the 49ers get, just based on their personnel and the way they run their offense, that's going to be an advantage, right? Instead of forcing the quarterback to constantly make the right decision, you're going to be able to get into a lot of your fun stuff that just causes, all sorts of problems for that middle of the field safety.
Yeah, and
Shawn, I have follow-up questions here about quarterbacks and want to get into that, and we'll get Tage's follow-up question. Let me hop in real quick and just make sure we're covering our bases with our sponsor, Circa Sports here. Get ready for more millions guaranteed. This contest is so big, we had to back the truck up. The biggest pro football contest in Las Vegas is back again for its 5th year. Circa Million and Circa Survivor with $14 million in guaranteed prizes. Only at Circa Sports. You can enter in Vegas. You can play from anywhere with 2 ways to win and no rake. Play the Circa Million Pro Football Contest with $6 million in total prizes, quarterly payouts, and 100% payback. Top prize is $1 million guaranteed. You can pick a winner with Circa Survivor with our biggest prize yet, $8 million guaranteed. Select one team each week. No point spread. It's bigger money than ever. Circa Million and Circa Survivor Pro Football Contests. Play today for your share of $14 million in guaranteed prizes. You won't want to miss out. Enter in Vegas, play from anywhere. Visit circasports.com for details. I can hint and say that you all, if you go to the Circa event, you will see a little bit of SumerSports there. Not in any gambling capacity, but I do believe that we'll have some folks out in Vegas saying, hey, so don't want to miss out on that. And lastly, as always, when we mention anything about gambling and gaming, we want to say gamble responsibly, play responsibly, and have fun with it. So Circa is a great book. Check it out. Check out the Circa Survivor and the Pro Football Contest there, circasports.com. That wasn't bad for the first ad read. I feel pretty good about that one. I'm not going to lie. Tage, why don't you hop in before I go? I'm going to go quarterbacks. I'm going to take us down the quarterback train. We're going to ask the Brock Purdy question. But before we get to that, why don't you go ahead and follow up there?
Yeah, and I do think that you deserve a trip to Vegas after that ad read. Hopefully we can all be a part of that and just check out what's going on there, even though we can't bet. But yeah, Shawn, I wanted to talk about, so you mentioned like having the running back line up in the backfield or having a receiver line up in the backfield and how that kind of changes the math. And I do remember our friend Arjun Menon looked at this data, and there is some selection bias to this data, but there were interesting results. When a wide receiver lines up in the backfield, the offense usually has a 0.33 EPA per play. When a running back lines up outside, not in the slot, so as an outside receiver, 0.08 EPA per play. And then when the running back lines up in the slot, it's negative 0.02. So how do you kind of see Shanahan trying to marry all of these different plus EV concepts together, like the wide receiver in the backfield or the running back outside?
I think that using a receiver in the backfield is unique, and usually it ends up in some sort of kind of combination of an option route. At the same time, right, it removes certain things, right? I think the Vikings, maybe more not last year, but the year before that, had some of Justin Jefferson in the backfield. And, usually he ran something that was kind of, at the hashes in that kind of range. So is that taking away his vertical ability? Okay, maybe, but it is a really fun changeup, especially if you can formation it so that your receiver who is at the running back position is getting matched up against a linebacker, right? Because, the NFL is always going to be a matchup league. So if you can use anything to manipulate that matchup, but again, it's a good way to use for a timing thing too, right? Because obviously, the running back or from the running back position, they have a longer way to go in shotgun to get to the line of scrimmage. Their route depth, they have more steps to get there. Therefore, the quarterback can say, for example, read left to right, where on the left side, I have my receiver running my option route. On the right side, now my running back's going to be able to do it. So instead of, so many of these concepts will have, an option route to one side and then someone kind of taking, like, they're faking like they're breaking out and then coming back inside where the quarterback can work in division. Now we're giving two really, really good players both option routes, right? So I think it's just a really, really cool way. I think we saw it a little bit more last year, and maybe we'll see it more this year as well. of just teams that are able to understand, okay, you can actually run 2 option routes on the same field, which I think is something that I haven't seen a ton of, especially from those kind of like ones that look exactly the same.
We're here talking today on the SumerSports show with Shawn Syed, Director of Communications at SumerSports, who wrote a pretty great article deep diving into the Shanahan offense. If you're just tuning in, or if you're listening, watching right now on YouTube or Facebook, maybe this goes out on LinkedIn, on Twitter, anywhere, you've got a question for Shawn about the offense, please post in the comments. Would love to share the wealth and not have Tej and I monopolize the Q&A here, although I'm happy to do it. Shawn, all right, we have to ask. Brock Purdy comes in and this offense almost doesn't miss a beat, right? Clearly there's a limit to how quarterback agnostic this offense is, because we saw what happened when Brock Purdy went down. But very clearly, that's a leading question. I'm recusing that question. Shawn, to what extent is this a quarterback agnostic offense and system? How is Shanahan different than, say, an Andy Reid in how he builds around personnel rather than building for personnel?
So I don't love the term quarterback agnostic. I understand why it's used, right? We've seen, like 5th and 6th round quarterbacks. We've seen backup quarterbacks. We've seen, everyone except for the emergency quarterback really be able to succeed in the offense. So I think I understand why that comes to mind, right? It's a different style of quarterbacking than obviously, for example, right, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. I do think that there's a lot obviously that goes into it, right? There's so many different, like I said, like verbiage at the line, understanding, how to kill a play, get from one play to the other, understanding when do we switch things in the run game. So I do think that there is a lot on the quarterback in the run game specifically. At the same time, it's hard for me to look at the numbers and say, okay, the 49ers see the most cover 3 in the league and not think, okay, that is not that it's easier on the quarterback, but that's, substantially different, I think, than when teams are just lining up in 2-eye against Patrick Mahomes, right? That is going to be a different defensive look that you're getting. And I do think that Shanahan understands when to make it easier on a quarterback as well, right? I think that sometimes one of the problems with the system is it seems like, I guess we don't really have great data on this, but if you put like the highest level quarterback, right? If you just took Patrick Mahomes and put him in this system, I'm not sure that Mahomes is able to reach the same sort of ceiling that he does now as like obviously potentially the greatest quarterback ever. He still could be that and like still obviously win Super Bowls, but there's just it's a different plate that the quarterback is looking at. Right. So, for example, for Andy Reid, their reads are so complex, and not that the Shanahan system is not, but I think it's able to, the systems like Andy Reid, Doug Peterson, of course, like it's able to access the top end talent of a quarterback more. So for me, the Shanahan system absolutely raises the floor of I think at least most quarterbacks. Right. So easy buttons are more available. Right. Like the run game, because it is so prevalent, you're going to get certain looks on defense. Right. The defense is going to have to spend so many resources on that. At the same time, if Shannon's, calling 2 runs in a row and you're looking at 3rd and 8, the play sheet just isn't as broad, I think, sometimes on pass game. Maybe not as broad, but it is so different, right? So when McVay, of course, they get to the Super Bowl, they lean on Matt Stafford in a total different way, right? And are able to get a different ceiling. Though, of course, I know Tej thinks that, he was always at that ceiling, but being able to just access a different part of a quarterback. And I think sometimes it's hard to articulate, but there's not training wheels on the quarterback, I think, in the Shanahan offense. But like we saw, of course, Matt Ryan have an amazing year with the Falcons there, right? So top end talent can still, of course, get to an MVP level. But I do think, because it raises the floor so much, unfortunately, it does, kneecap that top end sometimes. So obviously, is it quarterback agnostic? I'm going to give you a no answer on that one.
Follow-up question. Is Jimmy G actually a good quarterback? No, I'm kidding. We don't have to go down that route. But I think it is interesting how EPA King, Jimmy G. I think it is interesting how, again, I'm leading the witness here, but I think it's interesting how much reps in that system matter. You mentioned how the reads are different. And I think that you can be an armchair quarterback and be like, you threw that ball to a very wide open Christian McCaffrey, and then he ran for 20 yards. And that, I think a lot of people could have made that throw. I wonder how much getting those reps are. I look at someone like Skylar Thompson, who I'm not comparing him to Brock Purdy. I think they're very different quarterbacks, but I'm saying Skylar Thompson got kind of thrown into an emergency situation in the playoffs and really struggled, had some issues with the offensive line. And you think about the value of one reps in the Shanahan system, but two, just the value of starter reps. And I think that Shanahan's someone who's able to kind of maximize those starter reps in practice. And so if you flipped a quarterback and just said, hey, you're starting in a Shanahan offense this week, you have a week to learn it, obviously wouldn't change anything. But I do wonder about development. And as soon as I say that, and as I know that, I say, man, he's really great at developing the talent. He's kind of pushing himself there. But then you look at somebody like Trey Lance, who hasn't gotten those reps, and you think, okay, has Shanahan raised his floor? Could he be able to develop Trey Lance into what he needs? Or is that a situation where if you're not getting the quality reps, then, potentially the system passes you by? I think it's a fascinating experiment. And I don't even know if that's an answerable question, but the idea of kind of how much development matters for the quarterback might be what we mean when we talk about it being quarterback agnostic.
Yeah. The Trey Lance situation is just, I'm always rooting for Trey Lance. And, I want to see Trey Lance succeed because, if you have the quarterback in that run game, it is just so much more fun, right? It is so much more interesting. It causes the defense so much strife. And I think you saw towards the beginning of the season that, even when Jimmy G came in, they still had to run more pistol because I think that, Shanahan spent a lot of time kind of doing that, right? So, development, I do think it matters a lot. I think something that's interesting now is that, this system is obviously so spread across the league. So there are just more players that are, either used to the verbiage or used to, to the way that they use kind of West Coast reads or things like that. So not that a quarterback's able to just come in and succeed, but because, they've seen more things. And of course, not that this system particularly trickles down, but I do think, we will see and continue to see more 21 and 22 personnel at the NFL level this year, I hope. And then I do think at college in different ways. I think as a defensive coordinator, it's easier to draw up your favorite, like, okay, they're in, 10 personnel or 11 personnel. They're in 2x2. This is my menu of different things. Like we can kind of play with their two receivers to each side in the ways that we want to. That I think is a little easier than as a defensive coordinator figuring out, okay, I need to get my guy in the correct gap every single play. I need to, make sure my guys are destroying blocks and all those sorts of things. So again, I'm not going to say, I can't tell you yes or no if it is quarterback agnostic, partially because I don't want to say it's quarterback agnostic, right? Because I think there is still so much on their plates. Even if it's something where I'm just reading one guy and going to the next guy, that's still so much. And I think one of the ways to try and attack and beat the 49ers is you want to take the PlayStation controller out of Kyle Shanahan's hands, right? You want to get them into those kind of third and longs and you want to put it on the quarterback, right? Because if the quarterback isn't able to access their top end ceiling in that way, even though I think now Shanahan is leaning towards, the pass concepts are getting a little more vertical, the play action percentage is coming down, obviously getting Christian McCaffrey is another sign of, hey, we need to lean into these stars a little more. But if you can take the controller out of Shanahan's hands, make the quarterback make the right decision on third down every single time, that is obviously a way to beat any offense. But I think or maybe not every offense, but that's something that you'd want to do against the 49ers for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you look at the data, that's why Jimmy G has had the highest conversion rate on 3rd and 6+ since 2021 is because of kind of all those different concepts that they can get into. And you mentioned the addition of McCaffrey, where that can kind of start to change the math for the different offenses and everything there as well. And so when I look at, and we can, move from Shanahan to kind of how his ideas are spreading across the league. When I look at the Lions taking Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round, running back from Alabama, who is a pretty good rusher, but has the high-end receiving ability, I can see a parallel with the 49ers where they saw what McCaffrey was able to do to that offense last year, and they know that this 21 personnel or 22 personnel increase is coming, and they want to maybe get out ahead of the curve and take Jahmyr Gibbs and use him in ways like McCaffrey was being used with the 49ers. Did you kind of see that as well, or have you seen similarities around the league, not just with the Lions, but maybe with other teams trying to emulate what the 49ers were able to do last year once they traded for McCaffrey?
Well, Tej, love you trying to fit the Lions in. I know that's important to you. That's an important point for all of us. That is an interesting point. I think I love the Lions because they have a very, very detailed run game. And of course, Jared Goff comes from or played with McVay previously, right, in the Rams system. So it's an interesting comparison. Obviously, the Dolphins come off the Shanahan tree, but all the people within the system, I even hate calling it like the Shanahan offense or like calling it one system because the offenses are so different. So for example, the Dolphins, they were able to, obviously while Tua is healthy, access the shotgun play action game a lot more. Of course, when you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, your offense is going to look a lot different. And then, I'm interested to see guys like, Matt LaFleur, like what do the Packers look like this year when, yeah, he's from the quote tree, but also, is it something where they have to get just more back to basics a little bit with Jordan Love? But taking the concept of, heavier personnel, cannot wait to watch the Falcons offense this year, right? Even last year, they had so much fun. Obviously I understand the issues with running back value in the first round. Just moving that totally to the side, which I get is a big point. It's going to be so much fun. The different kind of playmakers they have in that offense, different ways they can do things. And even like little things, like the way that they outside zone block is just so beautiful, right? Like it is, outside zone is to me, it is really a dance. Like the way that the running back steps work with the offensive lineman, there's, a particular rhythm to it. And when the offensive line is cooking, it just looks great. And I'm obviously going to be high on guys like Kyle Pitts this year and even Drake London. But I do think that we should see more of those heavier personnel groups from different teams. I know Andy Reid, I think, said, hey, we're not going to play with the fullback this year. They're going to have, tight ends in that kind of position as a response to every year we see an increase of, okay, you guys are going to play more 2 high looks. You guys want to play cover 4. You're different kind of cover 6, cover 8. You're examples of it. One way to get you out of that is you're going to get the ball run down your throat at a certain level, right? And again, it's not just like, hey, we need to establish the run, but I think that offensive coordinators, even if they're not patient, they're happy to take those yards in the ways they can. And, if that they can be plus EV or plus EPA, like can those be positive runs? Do you have the ability to have a unique enough run system where you're able to kind of get some of those big plays off of it? And really the patience to, once you drop one of those safeties into the box, we're going to kind of, throw a big play over your head.
I do want to talk about the Falcons a little bit more. I love how you brought them up, and I do think that their personnel is interesting, and you can draw similarities to the 49ers personnel as well, with kind of where their high-value players are located and what those high-value players can do, and Kyle Pitts, Drake London, and now Bijan Robinson. And you have your Cordell Patterson type there, where he can kind of be the Swiss Army knife per se on that offense. And then Tyler Algier too is like kind of the 49ers, Jeff Wilson, or that type of running back, where he actually led the league last year in EPA per rush because of how good their offensive line was playing and how heavy their personnel groups were, and then also doing pretty well on his own. So when you can kind of throw those 5 guys onto the field, or even 4 of them out of those 5, and really change up the way that the looks are getting from the defense, do you see that as similarity to the what the 49ers did last year and what they're going to continue to do this year?
I hope so, right? What I love is as the system continues to spread, people always will put their own spin on it, right? It's so hard to just copy it, especially one, you can't copy like Kyle Shanahan's brain, right? That is a hard thing to do. But, of course, I think that, Kyle Pitts is just an incredible receiver, right? He really, really has it. And, Bijan Robinson is a different level of talent. I think he is going to be a really, really special running back. And as you said, right, like they already have Algier, and like the system is already kind of built the way that they, were able to have success with it last year. Sometimes I think about, do guys like Arthur Smith or Kyle Shanahan, like where it seems like, okay, obviously, Shanahan, saw McVay succeed with Stafford. Let's draft a quarterback early. But, we talk about all the time, drafting a quarterback is really hard, right? Like it is hard to evaluate quarterbacks. I don't think we have it down to a science. Of course, I think, you do your best with scouting, but there's so many things that you can't kind of evaluate, right? Or you can't make a direct connection between I see this here, I can put it on the field. So the Falcons, with a non-first round quarterback, it's going to be fun to kind of add them into those teams that I want to make sure everyone watches every single week on Sundays.
And that's what I think is so interesting is you mentioned drafting a quarterback, and McVay and Shanahan decided in the same offseason that they wanted to stop playing PlayStation, like you mentioned, as hard as they had to right in that moment with Jared Goff and Jimmy Garoppolo, respectively. And so the Rams' solution to that was going out, trading for Matthew Stafford, giving up picks and having to take on a veteran contract. And the 49ers solution to that was giving up their own picks, but hoping that they could get rookie contract value off of that and getting a more of an unknown, but a quarterback who had a ton of talent. And so I just think it was super intriguing that it was around the same moment that they decided that they didn't want to keep doing this game with limited quarterbacks and went out to try to get these high-end quarterbacks, whether it was from an arm talent perspective or a rushing perspective.
Yeah, and of course, LaFleur has Aaron Rodgers, right? So it's their system, of course, does look very different, I think, than what we're used to from McVay and Shanahan. But it just looks different, right? Part of it is, of course, the quarterback's comfort, where Aaron Rodgers, I think, would be more happy just being, hey, we're going to stay in the same formation all the time. We don't need to motion. We can go up tempo. And part of that is because, he has really Hall of Fame talent in him. So it's so fun to see, why do teams change? When do teams change? How do teams change? And that's, it makes it exciting every year that, especially for Shanahan, things just build off each other in a unique way, right? Where I think we've seen so much, 3-4 defenses where teams are really dedicated to, clogging those interior gaps while setting the edge, right? So defenses want to kind of mess around with those double teams in some way, right? Get a guy over the center, manipulate that double team that usually happens. And then what Shanahan does is, his outside zone and zone percentage is going to come down a little bit. It did last year, and they get to more gap scheme, right? They get more attacking and more vertical. And it's so hard, I think, they're on the hamster wheel. How many times, we got to be ahead of the defense. We got to be ahead of the defense. And I don't like to think about it just as like a pendulum, right? It's not just swinging from one thing to the other, but, each different iteration, it's like clay that's being formed and reformed. And, you learn from the last change into your next change, right? So more kind of gap scheme, attacking looks from the offense are going to be fun to see. And then from that, defenses are eventually going to have to kind of get back to more 4-down looks. And, what we're used to seeing kind of from a nickel defense, but obviously from a base personnel. I think that, if you want to watch games that were really fun on the defensive end, the Chargers and the Saints last year, where the Saints defense were just, they were so fun to watch, I think, in general. But, teams that have 4-down where they can get, maybe more linebackers on the field, not just a full swing back and forth, but just a constantly changing game.
Can you expand on that a little bit? Can you talk about what the Saints and the Chargers defenses were able to do to slow down a 49ers offense that was basically a buzzsaw in every other game they played last year?
Yeah. So of course there's certain little things that kind of ball bounces your way, whether it's, hey, 4th and 1, we got to stop on the goal line for the Saints, right? Of course there's things like that. What I liked is, I think that the Chargers specifically, they were changing their looks up a lot. So it's not just, we're going to line up in one thing, and then, Kyle Shanahan's going to be able to get a beat on what's coming at you. They use a lot of different things where, keep talking about it, right? Having what amounts to 6 down linemen, but really it's 4 defensive linemen with those outside linebackers. And then you just have 1 linebacker behind that. And that really is trying to take account for, okay, we've covered all the interior gaps, and, we're going to hold up our double teams and let our linebacker go. And a lot of times, of course it is game plan dependent, but also, players make plays, right? So seeing DeMar Davis, I think for the Saints, like he's an animal, right? He does a great job. He does a great job in that defense, is able to get downhill. So a lot of times it is just players, but the ability to match the 49ers heavy personnel with a heavy defense, but also seeing, the Saints middle linebacker run down the middle of the field with Deebo Samuel. So where the offense has these kind of hybrid players, the defense unfortunately has to have that too. Right. So it's fortunate that it's just a rising level of talent, I think, from college football in general, but finding those guys that, hey, maybe this guy hasn't had to play pass coverage his whole entire career, but we're going to get more out of him. The Chargers obviously have, Swiss Army knife for this year. Derwin James obviously wanted him to stay healthy, but his ability to, he can cover one of your best receivers. He can play the run hard. He can blitz the quarterback. Right. So defenses that have that kind of versatility, I think, are really interesting, and they're able to deal with these problems better. The same way we praise Shanahan for saying there's so much versatility from all these playmakers. When the defense has that, it's just, it's really awesome chess match at that point.
And that the versatility on both sides and the response counter response, I think, speaks to just how important innovation is in football. And it's not a static problem to be solved. It's evolving. It's, we nerds would say it's non-stationary from year to year, and it's things are moving and trends are happening. And so it's cool to see how we can focus in on one aspect of one part of on one part of kind of the entire NFL universe and say, here's how they're doing things. But even see examples last year where it didn't work and it was, kind of found out. And this year we could be on the watch for, okay, how are other teams going to try to disrupt in the same way, and how will they respond? And it's kind of the ever going back and forth. I'm very proud of myself for romanticizing about football there without saying chess match. I think that was a very big, important milestone there. Shawn, again, a great article up on SumerSports.com/the-zone. Sign up with an email there. Make sure you're following SumerSports on Twitter. People can follow you, Shawn, on Twitter at Syed Schemes with an S at the end, correct?
That is correct.
Great. Sean's our director of communications, so we're always getting grammar checked in the Slack messages. So I was making sure. I want to make sure I got that Slack right. Syed Schemes there on Twitter. Follow SumerSports on Twitter. Make sure you like, subscribe, rate, review the show. Help us share it and grow it to people who might enjoy it. Shawn, a wonderful conversation, and again, I seriously, an excellent article. It was a great read. It was very informative. I hope that everyone gets a chance to read it. Thanks for being here today.
Appreciate it so much, guys.
For my co-host, Tay Sheth, for our guest, Shawn Syed, for all of us at Sumer, I'm your host of the SumerSports show, Parker Fleming. We're here, had a rebroadcast on Monday. We'll be back on next Monday and Wednesday with some more great content. Looking forward to seeing all of you again soon.